We'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar today. On behalf of Razorleaf and CIMdata, we thank you for joining us. We've got an exciting topic to talk about, the integration imperative, enabling a connected digital thread. Let me share with you what our agenda will be for the next few minutes. We're going to start with some brief introductions of the people, as well as introductions of the topics that we'll talk about. And then we'll get into a little bit of a discussion by Peter, followed by a discussion by Jonathan, and we'll reserve some time at the end for some questions. With that in mind, if you do have any questions, there is the chat panel over in GoToWebinar. Please enter your questions in there. We'll take those questions, we'll save them for the end, and then we'll have a little bit of time for Peter, Jonathan, and possibly myself to answer some of those questions. Also, we are recording the webinar today. Those of you that registered and are in attendance, you'll receive a copy of that recording. Usually it comes out in the next 48 hours or so. Feel free to forward that on to others if you want to share this information with others. So let's talk about who we have with us today. I mentioned my name is Derek Neiding. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Razorleaf. So in my role, I help our clients kind of our manufacturing clients navigate the challenges that are all around digital transformation. We want to make sure that they have the right strategies, the right technologies to help them to grow their business and drive business success. So I'm going to facilitate today's conversation, doing some brief introductions and dealing with the questions at the end. We're also joined by Peter Bilello. Peter is the President and CEO of CIMdata. Peter is one of the foremost thought leaders in the PLM and digital transformation world. He's got decades of experience helping companies navigate the complexities of data integration and systems and processes. And so his insights on the digital thread and the role that integration plays, they're always valuable. So we're happy to have Peter with us today. And then we also are joined by Jonathan Scott. Jonathan is Razorleaf's chief architect. Jonathan helps work with our clients as they help determine what their project should look like, what technologies they should leverage, making sure that they have the right technologies and processes in place to gain the most value out of the digital transformation tools that they put out there. In addition, Jonathan serves on Razorleaf's executive committee. He's kind of our ear to the ground. So Jonathan lets us know what new technologies are coming, what emerging processes and technologies are out there that we need to keep our eye on. So we're happy to have Jonathan with us today as well. So we all know that digital transformation is a priority for manufacturers, but what often gets overlooked is the foundation that makes it possible. There's data, there's connectivity, there's integrations. So really a true digital thread is more than just having the data. We have to ensure that that data flows. It flows seamlessly across the enterprise. It connects the different business domains, engineering, manufacturing, service, whatever those domains may be. So today we're going to explore why integration is critical to achieving a connected digital thread. We're going to start with Peter, who's going to provide an industry perspective on the role of integration in enabling a digital thread. Then we're going to transition to Jonathan, who's going to take us into a little deeper dive into the practical realities of trying to build and maintain these integrations. So we want this to be interactive. I mentioned that we've got a question panel. Please feel free to submit your questions. And with that, let's get started. Peter, it's all you.
Well, Derek, thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone today. Being in this market for quite a number of years now, as mentioned already, working with a lot of our industrial clients and figuring them out what their strategies should be and what digital transformation means. We see a lot of issues, but also a lot of successes, and have identified over the years what's necessary to be successful. And again, I really appreciate this opportunity. It's a little bit more about myself. I've been with CIMdata now, which is a strategic management consulting firm in the area of PLM and everything it enables, for about 29 years now. So quite a bit of my career has been there. But before that, I came from aerospace, automotive primarily before that, and so had practical experience and continue to have practical experience to this day as we work with our clients. So let me just give you a brief introduction of CIMdata. If you don't know who we are, there's a summary on the next slide that talks just a little bit about us as being a strategic management consulting firm. As I go into this, I'll use the experience that we have working with our clients around the world. We are all about helping our clients maximize their return on investment. And that's ultimately, right to market, as we would describe it. If you want more information about CIMdata, just go to CIMdata.com. Plenty of information about us there. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this topic, because it's a very critical topic. And I want to make sure that everyone understands some of the things that Derek was just saying is really critical. If you want to digitally transform, it's about gaining a better level of efficiency, about streamlining processes, but it's ultimately about creating, managing, and using your digital assets, your information assets. Now, in the context of this discussion, we're talking about life cycle, so product life cycle. So we're talking about product data. And it's not just product data, by the way, in what the product is, but you also have to understand how you're going to make it, how you're going to support it, how you're going to commission it, decommission it, and so on. So it's all product related data. And often we find in digital transformations, people take a sub-optimization approach. They'll sub-optimize, they'll take a niche, and they won't really understand how data and its connectivity throughout the life cycle across the business domains and processes, which means systems as well, is critical to be successful. If not, you'll have a sub-optimization going on in pockets of the organization. So we have to understand and appreciate the integration of data and processes that create that data, use that information, and creates a better organization and better flow of that information itself, and making that information available to where it's needed, when it's needed, and certainly that information has to be valid for use. But unfortunately, as we've seen over the years, and I'm sure our colleagues from Razorleaf will echo this and many of their clients as well, that companies tend to overlook some of the fundamentals. And that fundamental really starts with an overall lifecycle connectivity and the integration from concept through life. Because if you don't do that, again, you're more likely to sub-optimize. So as we look at this from an industry perspective, we have developed out what we call the critical dozen. And these are 12 important trends and enablers for digital transformation that are often overlooked. Now, they're all critical, all 12, and I'm just going to briefly touch on the first 6 on this slide, and we'll have the 6th one come up in a second. And then I'll do the other ones a little bit later in the presentation. The order matters, and the order is really of implementation or the layers of capabilities, but they're all critical. And if you're going to optimize your life cycle, you have to have end-to-end connectivity. If you don't, then you're going to sub-optimize, because it's about right to market. Ultimately, you're going to maximize your return on investment from a company perspective if you actually optimize your end-to-end life cycle. And if you don't do that, again, sub-optimization is rampant, disconnected systems, disconnected processes, disconnected people, just leads to incredible inefficiency. So we have to first figure out, well, what does that end-to-end connectivity really mean? And how do we enable then a life cycle, an integrated life cycle? And once I do that, then I better make sure that I manage the data and processes so that they always are clear, concise, and valid, borrowing from CM2 phrase. And that means putting everything under change control or configuration management control, ensuring that the information is always valid for use and available for use, building out different structures of information, what we call a bill of information, some might call a product structure. And then from there, you can then take that into more model-based structures that can be used to enable model-based engineering as an example. So the next one here, why don't we go ahead and bring up number 6, is the convergence, as we say, between the digital thread and digital twin. At one point, we had 6 and 7. We had 1 was digital thread, and then number 7 was digital twin. And what we found is one without the other really doesn't make a lot of sense. So digital thread, or you'll see in a minute, a web of information that's needed, really is there for a purpose. And that purpose is, besides traceability, bidirectional traceability, it's often used and needs to be probably put into place for purpose, which is what digital twins does it need to enable. So I've said this for a couple of years now, that a digital twin without a thread is an orphan. The connectivity, the convergence of those two things are quite critical. Just to mention, this QR code will take you to a whole series of articles I've been writing for a few years now that are found on engineering.com. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide. So definition, digital thread. This is our preferred definition. It's as we say here, a communication framework that allows a connected data flow and integrated, and should underline that, integrated view of an asset's data. So it's digital twins throughout the life cycle. And it's sewing together the different disciplines that typically have to be brought together to deliver a product and or services to the market. So it's kind of two aspects of the thread. The first is tying together the different disciplines, and the second one is actually having the traceability from concept through life. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. So that end-to-end connectivity, end-to-end is really quite critical, the product structures. So we'll look at first kind of the traditional way of looking at the product lifecycle. We've seen this for decades, right? A linear sequential steps that you go or believe you go from product requirements to engineering bombs to manufacturing bombs to service bombs. And we have different structures underneath. There's linkages or kind of threads that could go underneath that have traceability from requirements all the way through what you're delivering to the market. But that's an incredibly oversimplified view. Because really what you have is a web of information, and that line that goes from product requirements to engineering bomb, there's decisions, there's nodes that take place where different decisions are made that evolve or transform the requirements into the engineering bomb. And a service bomb is not a result of the manufacturing bomb necessarily. There might be some inputs into it, like serialized parts, for example. But the structure of service is really something that's determined in engineering. And again, there's decisions that are made that transform information from an engineering bomb to a service bomb and to a manufacturing bomb. So a web depiction is probably a better way of describing it nowadays. And by the way, solutions are out there that can support this type of digital activities and integration. Let's kind of dive into this in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. So as I said, this digital thread, and you can actually look at this as a set of threads that make up a web. Some people will describe this as a network of decisions, and decisions are important. Why did I do something? Why did I design something with a certain material? That's part of the knowledge base of the organization that should be able to be seen within that thread or web of threads. And it's very effective when it's connected. And if it's not connected, you don't have much. You have point solutions that are requiring individuals to do a lot of heroic things to get things done. But you need to effectively connect information, that data and processes, so that the digital twins that are resulting information sets can be created, managed, and leveraged. And we believe a web is a better and more realistic representation of how data and processes are actually connected in the enterprise. And some people say, well, this is much more complex. Well, it always has been that complex. We've overly simplified it with pictures in the past. And the good news is digital thread enablement, I say, is pretty straightforward, but the process by which you do it can be complex. But with the right partner, with the right technologies and approaches, it can be done in a fairly straightforward manner. And I know my colleagues from Razorleaf will talk more about that after I'm done. Now, each of these threads or webs, can have literally hundreds of informational nodes and data repositories, again, requiring linkage. And if you're going to do any kind of model-based structures, the linkage becomes even more critical in the organization. Of course, the more complex your products are, the more complex your processes are, the more complex this data set looks like, and the more systems, processes, and organizations that have to be involved in actually building out an appropriate digital web that includes the correct digital threads that ultimately enable the right types of digital twins. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So this is, I would say, it may be a little bit more complex picture, but still fairly simplified. But this is the complexity we're dealing with. If we really want right to market, so right product, right time, right offering, right capabilities, right price, and everything, I really have to manage from an end-to-end perspective and have an understanding of the interconnectivity of the information that I need to produce, support, get to market, support, decommission, and so on, the whole life cycle management. If I don't do that, then again, I have these disconnected things. That's where inefficiency comes in. And there's a direct relationship between information, consistency, accuracy, connectivity, and so on, to the effectiveness and efficiency of the organization itself. Now, I put this up here not to scare anyone, but to show that there's logic behind these types of structures, these digital webs that are made up of multiple digital twins. And when you step back from this, you say, okay, so how do I do this? Well, You might be using a core PLM solution, and there's many out there like 3D Experience Platform, or maybe a Windchill or Team Center, or Aris Innovator, and many others. There's literally dozens and dozens of core solutions that support this type of approach. But there's also many other systems. Let's go ahead to the next slide and go into this a little bit more detail here. And it really, kind of the connectivity is a lifecycle connectivity, and you're running through many different solutions. These are going to be different desktop solutions, different enterprise solutions, different organizational responsibilities, different individuals, and different connectivity that's needed, because you're ultimately moving information from requirements all the way through life. And I say through life, not just end of life, because at the end of life, information can carry on, but that product may carry on as well. It may be repurposed or reused or recovered or recycled. And to do this, again, I have to connect solutions, organizations, processes, in order to actually have that end-to-end connectivity that I talked about as the first critical dozen. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide. So how do I go about this? So just a couple of things as advice, let's say, in what you should do and how you can go about doing it. First thing is, where's my information? Understanding where the repositories, where do I create information, where do I use information that should be part of the digital web. And kind of often we'll start even before that saying, all right, so what outcomes do I need? What are the different representations of information that I need? And of course, the simple ones is shown on the other slide. Engineering BOM, manufacturing BOM, service BOM, those types of structures. But maybe even the bigger picture, you can step back on and say, what kind of digital twins do I need to have? And I do say twins, because often there's different representations of information sets that you need to do different things with it. So it could be a physics-based twin for simulation purposes. It could be a simple twin as maintained bill of material. Those things will dictate also what type of digital web or what threads do you need and what systems you need to connect, what tools do you need to connect. And there's many different tools that both create information and use information that have to be part of this digital environment. So you build connections to develop and define bills of materials and other bills like for production and service as mentioned already. But you also, these repositories become important components for doing reports, applying maybe AI to it as well to see what trends are going on. But it becomes a wealth of information that has to be, again, always valid for use and available for those who need it, those systems and people who need it within the context of their appropriate processes. Let's go to part two. There's a couple other comments I'd like to make on creating a digital web. So as you reach deeper into the data repositories, again, where there's modifications, there's a lot of data that's being produced. And you don't necessarily need to have all that data, but you need to have the data that's needed for purpose from getting right to market. And don't forget the vital connections, and that's into change management, because number 2 was getting your processes and data in control, but number 3 then configuration management, which is about ensuring that your information that you're managing in this digital environment is always valid for use. It's appropriate, it's accurate, and it's usable for the organization when and where they need it. So developers then and maintainers, if you're a maintainer and developer of digital web, digital threads, you need to be on the lookout also for feedback loops. How do I make sure that information is enhanced over time? How do I make sure that it's always valid for use? And that in a way becomes the connection then to the physical environment, making sure that if you make a change to the physical environment, the digital environment actually mirrors that change, is a true digital web of threads, which make sure that the digital representation is always accurate to the physical representation. All right, let's go. A couple other thoughts I have before I turn it back to Derek. A couple of final points for consideration. If you think about the processes, they can be enabled with a digital web in different ways for different purposes. So you have to define those digital constructs, kind of going back to what digital constructs do you need, what BOMs, what digital twins and so on are required. Some of it's about traceability. What regulatory requirements do I have to support? What submittals do I have to do? DHF, for example, design history file in medical devices, or device master record, and there's many others in most industries have information sets that are required. And so how do I build out a digital web of information that allows me to publish out information sets as appropriate for my business? And your needs, your organizational needs, will need to kind of figure out through the users, what are those digital threads that have to achieve what purposes for the business itself. And the purposes should be delivering value, of course, value or necessity in the organization. And that digital web has to support those things. So to ensure access to internal technical expertise, outside resources, and other purpose, that you would do this, again, to connect not just information to information, but information to people, to owners of information, users of information, and making sure that over top you put in data governance. Data governance is the right roles and responsibilities, again, to make sure that the data is always clear, concise, and valid. It's under change control. It has the proper ownership anywhere in the life cycle. And ultimately, what you're making sure in these digital environments is that information is trustworthy. You know, it's an authoritative source of truth that can be used to make decisions. All right, I think it's just a couple of other points I'd like to make, and then we'll wrap up. And you know, where's the value? And that's what, again, you should be asking yourself. And often the value is in the links. It's in the nodes of information where decisions are made, and that you understand that I got to this representation, this digital twin, because I made these decisions. And those decisions have logic behind them, and that should be captured as well. In the future, you may come up and say, well, why did I make that decision? Well, if I have the information, I have the linkage, that I know how and why I did that. And some of the assumptions may have changed over time. So ultimately, you're trying to enable a set of digital twins of the physical assets you're managing, making sure that they're exact, they're up to date, and they're always usable within the context that you're trying to support the product and the services, maybe even the manufacturing system itself. We're often talking about now 4 different types of twins: product twins, production twins, service twins, and even organizational twins. And this digital web needs to capture and represent all the decisions. I said, I'm going to say that again because it's so important to capture the intellectual capital of the organization, not just the results of the discussions, but the true knowledge behind the discussions for later reuse. And then building out the digital web is about choosing the right nodes, the right repositories, the right process, and ultimately looking at where the value is to your customer, because that's, if it's valuable to your customer, it's going to be valuable to you as well. And so as you design this out and figure this out, you're going to realize there's multiple systems, processes, and organizations that need to be integrated together. So we keep coming back to integration. Digital web is an integration of information sets that cut across organizations, processes, and solutions, systems that support various aspects of product lifecycle management. All right, I think that's a pretty good summary of the key value. And the last thing I want to do before I conclude is the other 6 of the critical dozen. And they really, again, continue to build. So once I have digital threads and digital twins, I can start connecting the logical, the PLM environment, whatever that environment is, not necessarily one system, with IoT, for example, maybe IoT to connect the digital with the virtual. I'll be able to have product as a service and enable that using big data analytics, supporting many aspects of these critical dozen through artificial intelligence, which provides augmented intelligence to the human worker. The data governance already mentioned, really across and over top all of this. And finally, last is not least by any means, it's just as critical as the other 11, is you also often have to change or enhance the digital skills of the organization in order to take full advantage of the capabilities that you're enabling the business with. So finally, just concluding and wrapping up my section, remember, it's about data and the connectivity throughout the life cycle. If you don't think of an end-to-end perspective, you will sub-optimize and you'll fail to get the most out of your initiative. So you have to understand what is the relevant data, make sure that data is always available and valid for those who need it. And ultimately, you may have to focus on the overall lifecycle connectivity and integration. Without doing that, you can't build out these digital webs of threads that enable your business to be truly successful in the age of digital transformation. So with that, again, I'll be available for questions later in the webinar, but I believe at this time, I'll turn this back over to Derek. Thank you very much.
All right, Peter. Thank you so much. That was great. Appreciate your insightful look at why integration plays such a critical role to enable digital thread. I'll tell you 2 things that I really liked about what you said was that first point about there really isn't a difference between a digital thread and a digital twin. You don't have one without the other. And I thought that was a really good way to put that. My favorite point, though, was this introduction of this new idea of a digital web, that really it's a bunch of digital threads together that make this up. And I think that does a really good job of highlighting why the complexity is sometimes underestimated because a thread seems simple, but in reality, it really is this web. And so I thought that was really well put. So thanks for sharing that with us. I like how you pointed out that companies, they struggle because of the fragmented data, the disconnected systems. This makes it difficult to achieve kind of the level of connectivity that they're hoping for. And if you don't have the right strategy, then you're going to risk isolating pockets of that digital initiative. They're not going to work together. They're not going to drive the meaningful outcomes. So all of those were things that I appreciated. So thanks for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
So with that, let's shift gears and we'll dive a little deeper into the practical side of integration. So Jonathan is going to take it over. He's going to walk us through the technical and the operational aspects of creating a connected digital web, one that works, one what works, what doesn't. What do you need to think about when you're designing your integration strategy? So Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you, Derek. And thank you, Peter, for starting this off. I think a lot of what I have to say is going to feel like a bit of an echo to the points that you made. Hopefully, just digging a little deeper into practical steps that people can take. So I do want to talk about the key factors for integrating data to build digital threads, but webs, twins, however we want to look at it, right? And Peter gave us that good definition of the digital thread and why it really is a web, and why also it's connected to the concept of digital twin, right? Noting that you've got to have the underlying connected web of digital information for our digital twins to be relevant and for them to be accurate, right? So I want to put these factors, right, the things that I think are important to your strategy and the strategy you should be developing, into 4 buckets: process, people, data, and technology. And I want to emphasize the fact that technology is not the single most important factor related to your digital thread integration strategy. Each of these 4 areas needs your attention if you want to recognize value from your digital thread. So I want to start with the process bucket, but I'd like to take a step back and ask you to consider the context of your business processes, right? So we're talking about process, but I want to talk about context for a minute. And for me, that's your enterprise architecture. For those not familiar with the concept of EA, I want to offer a short definition and explanation. It is not the architecture of your enterprise IT systems. That's a misconception I held previously based on my literal interpretation of the words. I thought, enterprise architecture, we're talking about IT only. So don't feel bad if that's what you were thinking. That's what I thought for a long time too. But enterprise architecture is conceptual structures and operations of an organization and how those align with the organization's technology, right? So EA describes how your business is organized and how it operates, and including how it uses technology to operate. I think it's important to consider process in the context of enterprise architecture, because it's a reminder that your processes and your organizational structure can change with new and enabling technologies. I'm giving an example. Back when Excel and email were the enabling tech behind my company's expense report process, I could hardly imagine how a mobile phone, its camera, and an app could save me from having to spend an afternoon submitting expenses at the end of every trip. But the tech impacted the process and vice versa. So just a little idea of what I mean by looking at this broader context of your enterprise architecture. Okay, with that broader context in mind, let's start back at the simplest view of process. The digital thread use cases that would give your organization immediate benefit. Maybe you want to be able to see the contract requirements impacted by an engineering change, so your salesperson can capture the cost of a product change via a change order to the customer, right? So let's say that's our use case. But the trick is to describe these kinds of use cases and identify the value they're going to generate, right? Like, how much do you expect to make out of those change orders potentially in a year? So that's my first factor I think you should consider. Think about the use cases that are going to help you justify the digital thread that you want to build out. Now, let's zoom out just a little bit further from that, though. Let's talk about how these use cases impact your business processes. Will these use cases enhance or support your current business processes, or will the organization need to change its business processes to take advantage of these new digital thread enabled use cases? So consider what steps you will change, add, or remove to your current business processes as a result of your new digital thread capabilities. Now let's move forward in time a little bit and say that you've handled these first two steps, you're in process, you're putting these things in place. Think about the future. Whatever digital thread use cases you imagine initially that you use to justify this kind of activity, don't you think you'll probably think of some new ones next year and maybe the year after that and on and on? You're probably even trying to build your way to some type of digital twin like we talked about. A lot of times these are inextricable. A digital thread build out might be on your way to a digital twin or digital shadow, if you have a different view of what your twin should be. But you're probably going to do this in a stepwise fashion. And what I'm getting at is that stitching together your digital thread is not a discrete task or activity. It's not just a small project to execute. It's going to be a multi-year journey. So focus on your near-term use cases and your process changes at the beginning, but spend a little bit of time thinking about your possible future use cases so that your other decisions, things like your architecture and how you're going to evolve it over time and how it's going to impact your people, so that those things are framed by this larger context. Now, the last factor you should consider related to process is a little bit of blue sky thinking. So this is why I asked you to think about process in the context of your enterprise architecture initially. Ask yourself the question, how could we operate differently in the future? What kind of digital thread would we need to operate in that way? I'm borrowing a concept from Jorgen Dahl of GE Aviation when I ask, what needs to be true in the future so that our business can operate in a certain way? Whatever this blue sky thinking looks like to you. Maybe it's becoming not a product company, but a product as a service company. When you think about that future state, what do you need to make that true? This is helping to frame the ultimate digital thread vision that you might have. Have these discussions about transformation in the context of your enterprise architecture so that the right stakeholders within the business are involved and they can help shape and support your digital thread building activity. So let's switch to the people bucket now. Let's start by keeping things simple again. When I think about people in the digital thread, the first thing that comes to my mind is, how are people going to use it? Will it be some new interface called Digital Thread Explorer? Will it be some fancy new mobile app that they have on their phones? Or will it just be an extension inside some of the systems they already use, like PLM or ERP, and they just get more information in their interface or in their dashboard or whatnot? Now, maybe I'm getting the cart before the horse though. Before considering how they're going to use that thread, how do they even build it? But again, let's just take the simplest approach. People are going to keep using the systems they use today, and we'll just integrate them on the back end using business logic so that that's how the information is going to get in there. Hopefully you get my point. We need to think about how people will access the digital thread. If we ask ourselves those questions about how, that seems to answer the most fundamental piece regarding people in the digital thread. But wait, I think that overlooks something important, something that maybe we just assumed, and we shouldn't just assume and move past it. Who are the people we're talking about that are going to use this? We asked how they're going to use it, but who are we talking about? It's easy to assume we're talking about employees operating in the roles they fill today. But I want to take you back to my enterprise architecture point from earlier. Zoom out a little and consider whether the people you're building your digital thread for should only be your organization's workforce. Should you also be considering customers, partners, suppliers? Should you be thinking about people in the roles they're in today, or will their roles be different in the future? So you need to try and think about these two factors in concert. Who are your users and how will they access your digital thread, or how do you want them? How do they want to access your digital thread? And I put these two factors into a group related to the interface of your digital thread. But there's another grouping related to people, and that's the skills topic. Peter mentioned this. It was, I think, the 12th item, right? The last but not least in the critical dozen. So I've got two very distinct factors to raise related to skills in the digital thread. The first item is very logical. You're probably guessing it already, and it ties back to our question about how people are going to use the digital thread. If you're going to give them a new app, you'll need to give them some training, but not so fast. Maybe the digital thread you have in mind isn't a canned report, isn't something that is sort of natural and easy for them to use. Maybe it's more like a self-service report builder, right? They've got lots of choices of data in your digital thread, and they're going to need to pick and choose the fields or the connected objects that they want to see or that they want to show. Maybe they need to understand a business object schema to make effective use of this report builder interface. So what they need is more education than just technical training. I'm challenging you a bit here to make you think about what will make your people ready to use it, right? I didn't put training in the box. I said usage readiness. Are they going to need a training class and a training video or something else to be ready to put your digital thread to use? Okay, the second skill factor I want to highlight is arguably even more strategic. If your organization is going to commit time and money to build a digital thread, someone's going to be responsible for it. That digital thread owner is going to have to care for and maintain this digital thread, or at least the connections that build that digital thread, even if somebody else still owns the PLM, somebody else still owns the ERP, that kind of thing. But the question is that person, that digital thread owner, also going to be responsible for continuing to build it out? Remember my earlier suggestion that whatever digital thread use cases you define today, you'll have new ones next year, even more the year after that. What do you think about changes to your enterprise business systems like the underlying ERP, PLM, MES, etc.? Do you expect they're going to change in the next 3 to 5 years? I'm confident several things will change with repositories of your digital product data while you're building your digital thread. Okay, so you're probably going to be building your digital thread or at least modifying and updating it for years to come, and the underlying systems and data are going to be changing while you do it. So I propose you consider developing your own in-house capabilities around integration so you can quickly adapt, adjust, and extend your digital thread to meet your business's changing needs. All right, that's enough in the people bucket. Let's move on to the data bucket. The first thing I need to say about the data in your digital thread is that you need to have a good understanding of the character of your data to be able to integrate it effectively. I've seen many mistakes over the years, and some of them very costly, caused by a technical approach to data integration where very skilled developers just didn't understand the data they were working with. For example, imagine passing a bill of material from PLM into ERP when a network hiccup causes 1 or 2 records for the parts to be lost in the transfer. Now, resolving a problem like this has infinite possibilities, right? You got lots of choices, from letting the transfer stand and retrying the missing parts to accepting 98% success with a notification to an administrator that, hey, this is how it completed, to another option of rolling back the whole transaction. Now, those of you who understand the nature of a BOM will recognize that that second option I mentioned just isn't viable. That's not useful. 98% success isn't okay on a bill of material. But there are so many other characteristics, behaviors, and subtle nuances related to product data just like that, right? Think about versions and revisions of files, dependencies amongst CAD data sets, all of those kinds of things in the nature of product data that we have to be aware of. So this is a really important factor. Just make sure the people building your digital thread understand the character of that data and how to handle it properly. One specific characteristic of product data that I'd like to highlight as you're thinking about how to integrate, how to build out this digital thread is form or format. And I don't really mean file type when I say format. I mean, like, is it a data record, or is it a model? Is it a document? Maybe it's a scanned image, so it's digital but pseudo-digital, right? That sort of thing. That's what I mean here. The quality of your digital thread and the value it's able to provide depend really heavily on this input parameter. So let me give an example. You could link a 50-page requirements document into your digital thread and make that accessible when someone's trying to understand the impact of an engineering change, right? You've created a digital thread at that point to help with impact analysis when you're changing your product. You can see how it's connected to that requirements document, and the person doing the change could look at it to understand the impact. But they still have to sift through the hundreds of requirements in the document to find the 3 or 4 relevant entries to perform their impact analysis, right? Alternately, you could segment that document into the hundreds of individual requirement records and connect the specific requirements to specific components within the design, right? Like connecting the requirement about energy storage to the components related to the power system, that sort of thing. Data is granular, and your integration linkages should be too. You'll get a much better result from your digital thread when that engineer goes to do the impact analysis if they can go from the components that are impacted right to the requirements that they needed and can check things much more quickly. You see that difference, right? Form and format matters in your data. This impacts the quality of your digital thread. But let's dig into the quality of the underlying data itself. The quality of the digital data in your underlying repositories also impacts the quality of your resulting digital thread. Garbage in, garbage out, right? How will your digital thread handle duplications or even outright contradictions within or across your repositories? How is it going to know which option is quote unquote right? You try to find something, but there are actually 2 part number records for that thing, and they actually look like quite different parts. That's a problem, right? It's something maybe an expert can resolve, but a general user is going to have a real issue with that. So what are we going to do about that? And unfortunately, no, AI isn't going to solve these problems for us. Now, it might help, right? I have high hopes that it will help, but you have to think about how you're going to solve data quality problems because they can undermine the value of your digital thread. This is a really important factor for you to consider. In any case, that brings us to my last element related to data. And of course, this ties a bit back to people and process. I propose that you should consider how you're going to fix the quality problems in your data and how you're going to enhance other areas of your product data set. Changing its form or format is going to yield greater benefits from your digital thread, right? Like what I mentioned about turning a requirements document into a bunch of individual requirements records. That's a way to enhance it. Fixing it might be dealing with things like the contradictory data or duplicate data that you need to rationalize, right? Finding out which part number is correct and cleaning up that situation. A couple of things you can consider doing, right? You can do it systematically, right? By adding validations to your existing systems so that data moving forward can't be made in a bad way. And then you also need to go remediate your old data. Another option, undertake some enhancements in your business process, not a systematic thing, but a process-oriented solution to remove opportunities for errors and inconsistencies. Another possibility, Peter mentioned this earlier, I think this is a really important point for people to consider. Implement a data governance framework to federate and distribute the responsibility for getting the data quality right? Look at your data as if it were an asset, like a piece of capital equipment. Okay, that's my last point on the data front. I'm sure you already knew that data was important to your digital thread, but I hope you'll think about it and think about what specific actions you need to take on your existing data to make it support and enable your digital thread. Okay, let's move on to the technology factors. Most people in the technology space today start with this element, and too often they focus only on this element. So I'm mentioning it last on purpose. Not that tech is the least important element, but that we need to pay attention to the other 3 areas and not hyper-focus, as we engineers sometimes do, on the features, functions, and tech side of business problems. But that being said, you obviously can't build a digital thread without technology. So let's talk about the key factors you should be considering in this area. Let me start by talking about 2 ways to get started with a digital thread, which I don't recommend. So don't start building a digital thread by coding a connector between system A and system B. It may solve a specific problem, but it isn't likely to last. It will probably be hard to expand, and it will probably be expensive, at least in the cost of your time, right? So trust me on this, 20, 25 years ago, this is how I created some integrations for customers. So I speak from experience when I say this really isn't the way to go. The next option is a little better, but not by much. I don't recommend trying to build out a digital thread using generic middleware tooling. This is something we've also done in the past for customers. You can do it, but it isn't an efficient way to spend your time and money these days because there are multiple digital product focused middleware systems out there today. And yes, Razorleaf offers one named Clover. I'm not going to pitch our product here, but I do want to recommend that you look at a digital thread focused integration system, which has pre-built capabilities for building a digital thread. Why write and maintain your own adapters for 3D Experience, Teamcenter, Windchill, Aris, or other platforms when somebody else will do that for you? And they're going to maintain it over time as new versions of those tools are released. If the other bits of this kind of digital thread specific tooling are right for you, why not look at something that has existing adapters to PLM, MES, QMS, all the things that are relevant to you and the digital thread that you want to build? Now, don't get me wrong, you should also beware of buying something which claims you can just turn it on and it's going to start delivering a digital thread for you out of the box, right? That's snake oil. We started the webinar today with Peter describing the digital thread as more of a digital web, but more importantly, talking about how no two digital threads are alike, and organizations have to define their own based on their unique needs. So I first mentioned process as one of the key factors in your integration strategy. I noted that your digital thread use cases are going to increase in number and grow in scope over time. So the only way to sustainably build a digital thread then is to use tooling which can be configured, reconfigured, and sometimes even customized to support the use cases unique to your organization. Another factor you need to have in mind is the ability of your technology choices to scale. Most digital thread use cases will start out simple and grow over time, and that's great. Connecting 3 or 4 systems probably won't press your performance, but adding that 300th user and that 10th connected repository might. So don't paint yourself into a corner. Make choices that can grow to meet your situation. I won't get into the weeds during this webinar about how to scale, but one safe bet is to pick tech with a cloud native architecture. Something built to run on the cloud has a really good chance of being either containerized or using some other technique to ensure its ability to scale. And there are other good reasons to pick tools with a cloud native architecture like security, portability, etc. But cloud capable is typically a good measure of an ability to scale, even if you're planning to deploy the tool on premise or in an air-gapped environment. Lastly, and this may be the most challenging to assess because it's a buzzword people overuse, is to make sure whatever tech you pick is extensible. I'll admit I've struggled to understand how this term really applies to software, but my working definition of extensibility is the ability of something to deliver a capability for which it was not expressly designed. Another way of saying that is, I recommend you choose tech, which is a balance of pre-built capabilities and modular and flexible tools. So a toolkit, but with some of the most common things pre-configured, like adapters to common systems or algorithms for dealing with common data types like documents, bills of material, CAD data, that kind of thing. It goes right back to that character of the data point that I brought up earlier. So these are some key factors for your integration strategy in the tech area. Find something with built-in capabilities, which can still be configured and customized, is scalable, and which you believe will be capable of extending beyond its original design. Okay, so let me bring that all together for you. Peter had the critical dozen, and I felt a little inadequate when we were putting this together, so I'm offering a 4x4 matrix for a total of 16. So in the process area, remember to keep your enterprise architecture in mind, but first, define the use cases which will help you justify starting to build your digital thread. Consider what process changes are needed to leverage it. Think about what use cases you're expecting in the future, and then consider how those future capabilities might transform your processes and your organization's operating model. In the people area, Think about how your users are going to access your digital thread. And when you're considering that, remember to think broadly about who those users are, whether they're internal only or include some external parties as well. When you're thinking about them and how they're going to access it, remember they have to get ready to use it. They don't necessarily have the skills, or in some cases, maybe even the knowledge that they need to make good use of the digital thread. Now, don't only think about the people using it though. As you're thinking about this digital thread and how to maintain it and build it out and adapt it over time, recognize that you probably want an internal team with the capability to help you keep building out this digital thread. So think of integration as a core skill set you want on the team that owns and maintains your digital thread. Regarding data, remember to understand the character of the data. Don't let people work with your digital thread from a purely technical perspective if they don't understand the kind of product data that they're working with. Also, think about the form and format that the data is taking. Is it really what you need to support the kind of use cases that you have for your digital thread? And check the underlying data quality. This is one of those garbage in, garbage out kind of moments where if you've got duplicates or contradictory information, your digital thread is just going to expose that to people. So consider how you're going to fix that. How are you going to enhance that data, improve that form and format over time? How are you going to care for that data? Because this is a really important asset. For technology, I'm advising you take a tool that's a toolkit, but that has some things ready for you to use already. Some pre-built capabilities that hopefully you don't have to maintain on your own over time. But you need your integration system to be something which can be configured and customized because it has to be adaptable. You have to change it over time as your use cases and your goals change, as well as the technology landscape changing underneath it. Remember that it needs to be scalable, so make sure to watch out for that in picking your tech, and you really want something that's extensible because you don't know what curveballs are coming. So those are the factors that I think you want to be considering as you're planning your strategy for integration to support your digital thread. Derek, back over to you.
Wow, Jonathan, Peter, thank you. That was a lot of great insights. We covered a lot of different ground today. Started with the high level importance of integration and the digital thread, or the digital web as we're calling it, down to some of the practical challenges and the strategies to make it work. So that was really good stuff. One of the key takeaways that I got from that is that integration just isn't an IT challenge. It's really a business challenge. And without the right integration strategy, you can't really fully leverage the investment. You've got these tools, PLM, MES, ERP, and you really can't leverage them without the right strategy. And so that's critically important. We want to take a few minutes just to address some audience questions. We only have a couple minutes left. There's quite a few questions, but we won't get to all of them. For those that we don't get to the question, we will contact you through email and just send you an answer, or at least our perspective on what we think of that question. We got this question in a couple different forms. So I'm going to throw this out to both. I think Peter and Jonathan both will probably have a comment on this. Came in a couple different forms, but it basically boils down to ROI, or how do you justify? So we'll start with Peter. How would you answer that? How do you find the value or measure the ROI of putting these tools and processes in place?
Ultimately, it's what's the purpose, right? So what am I going to enable from a business perspective? Do I enable new processes, a new insight? Do I enable a new business itself, or new business offering? So you have to figure out what's the outcome of doing what. So if I started with a digital twin, for example, what is that digital twin going to do for me and for my customer? And then from there, I can go figure out value. But I have to have that in mind first, because it's not, and as Jonathan was saying a couple of different times, it's not a technology thing ultimately. It's what's the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish, and then what's the value of that, and then what technologies are needed to go actually enable it.
Great. Anything to add to that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think what I'd add to it is that you have to really, and this is me speaking as an engineer, take your engineering hat off and put your creative thinking hat on from a business perspective, like Peter was saying about the business value. But you may have to be, think outside the box as you're doing it. The thing I mentioned, I borrowed from Jorgen Dahl of GE Aviation. I really liked his point about what needs to be true in the future, right? So I think to really get a good picture of ROI, think about what you're trying to change, and then maybe be as campy as think, what superpowers do you need, right? Forget about exactly what you have today in terms of your data landscape, but what would you need to be able to predict when your products are going to need maintenance or whatever it might be. And think about it in those terms about the future, dream big, and then say, now what would that be worth to us? If we could do that, how would that make things different? Now this is tricky, right? And this is a sort of a business analysis challenge, but that's the piece I would add to it is think big, sometimes think about a broader digital thread beyond just little point solutions about, how would I answer my engineering change process faster, that kind of thing. But when you think about those big pictures and try to identify the value, I think that's where you can see some really interesting things on ROI. It is still just an estimate, right? But I think that's powerful.
Good. Okay. Good points. Thank you for that. So again, another question we got in a couple different formats, but I'm going to sum it up this way: is how do you get started? I mean, Jonathan, you touched a little bit on this, but maybe we'll start with you, Jonathan. How do you get started on this? I mean, you've got the investment, you've got the money. What two systems do I connect first?
Yeah, that's a great point. So we talked about knowing, you just said if you've got the money, right? If you've got the money, hopefully it came from you saying, here's a justification for it, and there was a use case behind that. Oh, I'm going to answer this kind of thing faster. I'm going to give access to this kind of information to these people. It'll help speed up their day-to-day work. Whatever that use case is, that should direct you where you want to go first. Now, the question will become, what's the highest priority, or maybe what's the longest lead item in the schedule to get all the components in place to deliver on that, right? And that's where I really wanted to highlight those 4 different areas in these key factors today. Is it could be that, the fastest part of this, of putting that in place, is going to be picking some technology and doing the technical integration. Maybe not, but it could be that the longest pole in your tent is cleaning up your data, because the data you have isn't good enough to be usable to get the result that you want. So, this may sound like a pat answer, but I think it's analyze all those factors to figure out how do you get to the goal that you have in mind. That's where you should start, because then that tells you how to do things in the right order and how you can get there. Good.
Peter, anything to add to that?
Just kind of echoing and emphasizing something that Jonathan was talking about, foundational elements. If I'm going to build out a digital environment, the foundational elements themselves are infrastructure, the data management, for example. The infrastructure by itself doesn't provide much value. It's how you use it. But if I don't have the wires in the wall, I'm not going to be able to plug anything in. So if I don't have the data management underneath in this digital environment that's supporting the digital web and the threads, then I'm not going to have any value. So the data, as Jonathan very well said, that could be one of those critical elements of enablement, a foundational element. And if you stop there, you don't have much value. But if you don't start there, you won't have value either.
Very good. Well, we've reached the end of our webinar. And so I want to thank Peter and Jonathan. We did, like I said, we had a few other questions. We'll get those responded to in email. But I want to thank Peter and Jonathan for sharing their expertise. And we want to thank everyone that was able to attend. As I mentioned, we'll send you a copy of the recorded webinar. Feel free to forward that on. We started our conversation by asking, how do we ensure that the data is always available, it's valid, it's connected throughout the product lifecycle? And I think we've seen that the answer lies in a well thought out integration approach, one that connects the right systems, enables a true digital thread, and ultimately drives better decision making and better business outcomes. So if this discussion resonated with you, or if you think it would resonate with others in your organization, we'd love to continue the conversation with you. Feel free to reach out to Razorleaf or CIMdata if you have specific questions you'd like to talk about. And as you navigate your challenges, we want to point out the Razorleaf podcast, Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering. So it's a podcast that we release an episode weekly. Jonathan is one of the co-hosts of that podcast, and we cover everything digital about the manufacturing and engineering world. So we'd like you to be a part of that. And feel free to email any of us or visit our websites if you have any questions. So once again, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Peter and Jonathan, for walking us through this.